The crack of the whip was the only sound. Talia, bound to the frost iron post in the orphanage courtyard, had long since stopped crying out. Each lash was a sunburst of agony across her back, but her mind retreated inward, to the quiet place she had built to survive. An Omega's place, where she felt not just her own pain, but the flickers of fear from the other orphaned pups watching, and even the cold, twisted satisfaction radiating from Warden Sealers as he wielded the lash. "Disgusting Omega traitor," Sealers roared, his beta strength making the whip sing. "You soil our territory with a human stench. You are a weakness to be purged." The other children, mostly betas and a few low-ranking alphas, watched in horrified silence. To them, Talia was the pack's bottom, the silent girl who could calm a tantrum with a touch and sense a storm before it came. Now she was a lesson. Her crime was mercy. 2 nights prior, she had been drawn to the edge of the forbidden woods by a scent, not the metallic smell of a hunter, but the deep, complex aroma of earth, storm, and wild pine, buried under layers of agony and blood. It called to her Omega nature, the primal urge to soothe and protect the wounded. She found him, a man near death, his body broken, human. The Moon Law was clear: no contact, humans were dangers or prey. But her Omega heart, the very core her pack despised as weak, screamed in refusal. She could not leave life to fade. Using all her slight strength, she dragged him to a shallow cave, her small hands clumsily cleaning his wounds with herbs, sharing her own water. She sang the old, wordless lullaby her mother had sung, the one that could ease the worst nightmares. For a few hours, she was not a worthless Omega, but a healer. She never saw his face clearly in the dark. She never knew. 30 lashes for endangering the pack, Sealers bellowed, and 20 more for the impurity of your touch. The wolfsbane on the whip's tips was a special torment for an Omega. It didn't just burn, it screamed into her senses, overwhelming the gentle web of emotions she normally perceived, replacing it with blinding, toxic fire. She felt her connection to the pack, the faint, always present hum of their moods, snap and go silent. It was a loneliness worse than the pain. "I would do it again," she thought, the words a fragile mantra in her mind as the world grayed. "To let him die would have been to betray myself." Just as her knees gave way and her consciousness began to fray, a new sensation pierced the void. It started not as a scent, but as a pressure, a profound tectonic stillness that made the very air grow heavy. Then came the scent itself, an avalanche of pure, untamed power, ancient forest, granite, and the electric chill of a king's winter. It was an alpha's aura, but magnified 1,000-fold, so potent it made Warden Sealers' next blow falter in midair. Every wolf in the courtyard, down to the smallest pup, was driven to their knees by instinct, heads bowing, necks baring. In the forest, the man she saved awoke. His body was healed, his strength restored with a violent suddenness. The memory of the cave was crisp, the soft, healing hands, the hauntingly sweet lullaby that had pulled him back from the brink, the scent of vanilla and empathy that had wrapped around him like a shield. Omega, his wolf Garth, had recognized her essence immediately, even in his wounded state. His mate. Luke, the Alpha King, rose. His guard found him moments later, prostrating themselves in the clearing. "The Omega from the Greyfrost Orphanage," Luke growled, his voice raw with a king's wrath. "She is being punished for saving me." His beta Kyle looked stricken. "An Omega, my king, the Moon Law states." "I am the Moon Law," Luke's roar shook the trees. His shift was instantaneous. A wolf of midnight and shadow, larger than any natural beast, with eyes that glowed like captured Arctic stars, surged toward the orphanage. His single thought was a command, a prayer, a promise. "Mine, hold on." The gates did not open, they ceased to exist. One moment they were reinforced silver and iron, the next they were a cloud of splinters and dust. And in the center stood the Wolf King. The overwhelming dominance of his presence was a physical force. Warden Sealers crumpled, the whip falling from limp fingers. "Alpha King, this is a misunderstanding. This lowly Omega consorted with a human she." Luke shifted. Naked, glorious, and radiating fury, he ignored the warden as if he were nothing. His gaze was locked on the small, broken figure at the post. He reached her in 2 strides. His fingers, which could shred steel, touched the silver chains binding her. They didn't break, they unmade, falling away as fine, harmless dust. Talia slumped, but he was there. He gathered her against his chest with impossible gentleness, cradling her like something precious. Her blood, warm and shockingly red against her pale skin, marked him. Her lashes fluttered. Her moon-silver eyes, clouded with pain and omega submission, met his storm-blue ones. In that instant, the world stopped. The mate bond slammed into place, not with a roar, but with a resonant chime that vibrated in their very souls. For Luke, it was the missing piece of his kingdom falling into place. For Talia, it was the first touch that did not demand, but cherished, a strength that did not dominate, but sheltered. A silent, perfect understanding flowed between them, heart to heart. Luke looked from her battered face to the sneering warden. His voice, when it came, was the calm before an extinction-level storm. "You have tortured the heart I have searched centuries for," Luke said, each word dropping like a stone of judgment. "You have scarred the gentle soul who will be the Luna of all wolves." A collective gasp rippled through the courtyard. A Luna, an Omega. Talia trembled in his arms, a soft whimper escaping her. Luke held her closer, his lips brushing her hair. "Your mercy condemned you here, little Omega," he whispered for her alone, "but it crowned you in my eyes. You saved your king. Now your king is yours." He turned, his royal decree echoing over the bowed heads of every wolf present. "This orphanage is under the crown's control. This warden is condemned. His fate is mine, and it begins now." As his warriors moved, Luke's entire focus returned to the woman in his arms. Her secret, the immense, latent power of an Omega bonded to a king, was still asleep. Her journey was a cliff's edge, but she was not, and would never be, alone again. The world returned to Talia in fragments. First came the scent, not the damp stone, wolfsbane and misery of the orphanage cellar, but something clean and profound. It was cedar smoke, crisp linen, and beneath it all, the unmistakable, grounding aroma of the forest after rain. His scent. It wrapped around her, a tangible blanket of safety. Then came the feeling, not the rasp of rough burlap against her torn back, but the impossible softness of silk and down beneath her. The pain was still a distant, throbbing echo, but it was muffled, held at bay by something cool and soothing pressed against her wounds. Finally sound, the crackle of a large fireplace, the low, rhythmic cadence of a deep, steady breath nearby, and her own heartbeat, no longer a frantic bird trapped in her ribs, but a slower, steadier drum. She forced her eyes open. The ceiling above her was a vault of dark, polished wood, inlaid with intricate carvings of running wolves under a mother-of-pearl moon. A fire danced in a hearth large enough to stand in, casting warm, dancing light over walls hung with rich tapestries. This was not a room. This was a chamber fit for four. "You're awake." The voice, like gravel smoothed by a river, came from her right. She turned her head, a small motion that sent a fresh spark of pain down her spine, and saw him. Alpha King Luke. He was not a distant, terrifying figure of power now. He sat in a large armchair pulled close to the bedside, his elbows on his knees, his storm-blue eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He had shed his royal bearing. He wore only simple dark trousers and a linen shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. In his large hands, he held a small, empty porcelain bowl and a cloth. Where her voice was a dry rasp. The king's private chambers, in the Blackstone Keep. His gaze never left her face, studying every flicker of her expression. "You are safe, the healers have been, the wolfsbane is purged, your wounds are healing." The king's private chambers. Panic, thin and sharp, cut through the haze. An Omega in the Alpha King's bed. It was a violation of natural order more shocking than her whipping. She tried to push herself up, a weak, aborted movement. No, the word was gentle but absolute. A large, warm hand hovered over her shoulder, not touching, but its heat was a brand. "You will not strain yourself. The deepest healing is still to come." "I shouldn't be here," she whispered, her eyes darting toward the door, expecting guards, condemnation, another punishment for overstepping. "There is no other place in this world or the next where you should be," Luke said, his voice dropping. He placed the bowl aside and leaned closer. The mate bond between them, that silent, resonant chord that had snapped into place in the courtyard, hummed to life. It wasn't a sound but a feeling, a pull, a recognition so deep it felt ancestral. Through it she didn't sense dominance or anger from him. She sensed a fierce, protective worry, and beneath that, a profound, unsettling awe. Awe directed at her. The bond, she breathed, feeling its truth in her marrow. Yes, he didn't smile, but the harsh lines of his face softened. I have waited 3 centuries for it to find me. I had given up hope, and it led me to you, tied to a post, bleeding for an act of courage my entire kingdom would call a crime. Shame flushed through her. It wasn't courage, it was what I am. An Omega can't ignore suffering, it's a flaw. It is your power, he countered, his tone leaving no room for argument. You saw a wounded creature and your first instinct was to heal. I saw a wounded creature and my first instinct until you was to assess its threat or its use. You have a compass in your soul, Talia, one that points true. My kingdom has lost its way, it needs that compass. He knew her name, he had learned her name. The warden, the others, the memories of the courtyard, of the watching eyes, rushed back. A shadow passed over Luke's face, a glimpse of the storm she knew raged within him. Sealers is in the obsidian cells, awaiting my judgment. The orphanage is under the control of my beta, Kyle. He is assessing each child. Those with family will be returned. Those without, he paused, his eyes holding hers, will have a place here if they wish it. They will never know such cruelty again. You have my vow. Tears, hot and sudden, welled in Talia's eyes. It was more than she had ever dared dream, not just her own rescue, but safety for the others like her. She blinked them back, an Omega's instinct to hide vulnerability. Do not hide from me, Luke murmured, and this time his hand did come up. With a touch so careful it made her tremble, he brushed a stray tear from her cheek with his thumb. The contact was electric. The bond sang between them, a surge of warmth and rightness that momentarily eclipsed her pain. His breath hitched, he felt it too. Never from me, your heart is safe here. For a long moment, they simply existed in that silence, connected by the thread of fate and the crackle of the fire. The moment was shattered by a firm, polite knock at the heavy chamber door. Luke's gentle expression hardened into the impassive mask of a king. Enter. The door opened to reveal Kyle, the king's beta. He was a serious man with a warrior's bearing, but his eyes widened fractionally as he took in the scene, the king at the bedside of the ragged Omega. He bowed low. My king, the High Council has assembled in the Moonstone Hall. They are agitated. They demand an audience. Luke didn't move. They demand. Kyle cleared his throat. They have heard rumors of an Omega from the Grey Frost brought into your private sanctum. They speak of a breach of the moon law and tradition. A low growl built in Luke's chest, a sound of pure menace. Talia felt a spike of fear, not for herself, but for the conflict she was causing. The Omega in her wanted to soothe, to shrink, to make the problem disappear. Tell the council, Luke said, his voice cold steel, that their king will address them at the 10th hour, not a moment before, and they will await my pleasure. Yes, my king, Kyle bowed again, his gaze flickering to Talia with a mixture of curiosity and something else, respect. He withdrew, closing the door softly. The tension in the room remained. Luke turned back to her, the storm still in his eyes. They will challenge this, Talia said softly, stating the unavoidable truth. They will say you are weakened, that an Omega Luna is an abomination. Let them try, the words were simple, deadly. For 300 years I have ruled through strength and stone. I built a kingdom of power, but I see now it has no heart, it has no mercy. His hand found hers where it lay on the silk coverlet. He didn't grasp it, he simply covered it, his warmth seeping into her skin. You are not an abomination, Talia. You are the answer to a question I was too arrogant to ask. You are my fated mate, my Luna. And tonight, the world will know it. The conviction in his voice was a fortress, but Talia, an Omega who had survived by reading the emotions in a room, felt the undercurrents. This would be a war, not of claws and teeth, but of tradition and prejudice. And she, wounded and raised as nothing, was to be his standard in that battle. I am not strong, she confessed, the words a shameful whisper. Not like them, not like you. Luke leaned in close, his face inches from hers. His scent enveloped her, his power a tangible force, but it did not crush, it fortified. You are strong where it matters, he said, his breath ghosting over her lips. You endured where others would have broken. You showed kindness where others would have shown cruelty. You have the only strength that can truly rule, the strength to care. He pulled back slightly, his eyes blazing. Now you must learn another strength, the strength to be seen. He stood, the caring man at her bedside, transforming once more into the sovereign. Rest, heal. The royal healer Ilara will attend to you. She is loyal, trust her. He walked toward the door, then paused, looking back at her. The raw emotion in his gaze stole the air from her lungs. When you are ready, you will stand beside me, and together we will remake this world. He left, closing the door behind him, leaving Talia alone in the vast, opulent chamber that was now her cage and her sanctuary. The silence roared back. The weight of his words, of the title he had bestowed, Luna, pressed down on her. She was an Omega. Omegas were listeners, comforters, the hidden glue of a pack. They were not queens. They did not stand before councils. A soft knock came at a smaller side door. It opened, and an older woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair entered. She carried a tray of salves and fresh bandages. She bowed her head, not in fear, but in genuine respect. "My lady Luna, I am Ilara. The king has asked me to care for you." Her voice was like a balm. "May I approach?" Lady Luna. The title was a foreign garment, ill-fitting and heavy. Talia nodded, unable to speak. Ilara worked with efficient, gentle hands, changing the poultices on Talia's back. The salve was icy and immediately numbing. "This is made from moon-blessed silverweed and starlight moss," Ilara explained softly. "It will heal the flesh and prevent scarring." The king was most insistent. "He was," Talia whispered. "Oh yes," a knowing, gentle smile touched Ilara's lips. "I have served the royal family for 100 years. I have never seen him like this. Not when he won the Great War, not when he was crowned. When he carried you in, covered in blood." She shook her head, her eyes distant. "His rage could have leveled the keep. But his touch with you, it was as if he held the moon itself, afraid it would crumble." Talia absorbed this, the image so at odds with the terrifying king from the courtyard. "The council," Talia ventured. Ilara's smile faded. "A nest of old wolves with old ideas. They have been trying to get one of their alpha daughters into this very chamber for decades. They will see you as an obstacle." She finished the bandaging and helped Talia sip some water. "But do not mistake them, my lady. The king's word is law. And more than that," she paused, her wise eyes holding Talia, "the moon goddess does not make mistakes. The bond is sacred. They can rage against a king's choice, but they cannot fight a goddess's decree. Remember that." After Ilara left, Talia lay back, Ilara's words and Luke's warring inside her. The fear was a cold stone in her stomach, but beneath it, something else was stirring, fragile and new. It was the bond. It thrummed softly within her, a constant, low-grade warmth that felt like a promise. It was his steadiness, his unwavering certainty, bleeding into her soul across the distance of the keep. She could feel him, a bright, fierce star of will and power, moving away from her toward the hall of his arguing nobles. And with that feeling came the first, faint stirring of something that felt like courage. Not the courage to fight, but the courage to be. She was Talia, the orphaned Omega, the girl who saved a king. And tonight, the world would know. In the Moonstone Hall, the storm was brewing. The massive hall was filled with the most powerful alphas of the kingdom, their auras clashing like swords. At the head of the room, 2 thrones sat upon a dais, one large and carved of obsidian, the other slightly smaller, made of moon-white marble. It had sat empty for centuries. Luke entered not from the main doors, but from a hidden entrance behind the dais. He did not walk to his throne. He stood before it, his presence silencing the room instantly. "You summoned a council," Luke began, his voice echoing in the stillness. "I will give you your audience, speak your concerns, but choose your words as if your life depends on it. For in challenging my mate, you challenge me, and in challenging me, you challenge the will of the moon goddess herself." An older alpha, Lord Borin, from an ancient, prestigious line, stepped forward. "My king, the rumors, they say you claim a Greyfrost Omega as your fated mate. It cannot be. The bloodlines must be pure. An Omega cannot hold the stability of a pack, let alone a kingdom. Her instinct is to submit, to flee. She is weak." The word hung in the air, an insult to the woman lying in his chambers. Luke's power erupted. It wasn't a growl, but a wave of pure alpha authority that forced every wolf in the room to their knees, their heads bowing against their will. The stone beneath their feet seemed to tremble. "You speak of weakness," Luke boomed, his eyes glowing with a faint blue light. She, who was whipped half to death for showing mercy, you who kneel because my will commands it, tell me, Lord Borin, where does the true weakness lie? He slowly retracted his power, allowing them to rise, shaken. The bond is real, Luke stated, leaving no room for doubt. I have felt it. She is my fated Luna. This is not politics, this is fate. And my first decree as a bonded king is this: the moon law is amended. Worth is not determined by designation alone, but by the strength of one's heart and the truth of one's soul. The Greyfrost orphanage is dissolved. Any wolf of any rank found practicing such cruelty will face the king's justice. A younger, more ambitious Alpha, Lord Kieran, dared to speak. And if this, Omega, cannot perform the duties of a Luna, if the people do not accept her. Luke finally moved. He walked to the empty marble throne. He placed a hand on its cold, smooth back. Then I will teach her, and she will teach you. He looked over the assembled, his gaze final. The coronation of Lunatalia will take place at the next full moon. Attendance is not optional. This council is dismissed. He turned his back on them, a supreme gesture of dismissal and power, and stared at the white throne. Hold on, little Omega, he thought, sending the words down the bond that connected them, a private thread in the public tumult. Our battle is just beginning. And in the quiet of the king's chamber, Talia heard him, not with her ears, but with her soul. She turned her face into the pillow that smelled of cedar and storm, and for the first time, she did not feel alone. The Omega had found her anchor, and the anchor would move heaven and earth for her. The next week passed in a blur of soft voices, healing sleep, and the strange, quiet rhythm of life within the king's inner sanctum. Talia's world, once defined by stone walls and the sting of a lash, was now measured by the changing light on the tapestries, Ilara's gentle visits, and the constant, low hum of the bond in her chest. Her physical healing, aided by the moon-blessed salves and her own latent Omega resilience, was swift. The angry welts faded to pink lines, the deep ache subsiding to a memory. It was the other healing, the healing of her spirit, that moved more slowly. She spent hours by the large window in the antechamber of Luke's rooms, wrapped in a borrowed robe of impossibly soft grey wool, watching the kingdom below. Blackstone Keep was a marvel of towering spires and formidable walls, but beyond it sprawled a vibrant city, and further still, the endless expanse of the royal forests. She saw patrolling guards, bustling markets, and the distant shapes of wolves running in the fields. It was a living, breathing world she had only ever glimpsed from the bottom of a well. Luke was a constant, yet often absent presence. He ruled his kingdom, and the fallout from his announcements was significant. He spent long hours in council with his generals and managing the dissolution of Greyfrost, but every evening, like clockwork, he would return. He never entered with pomp. He would simply appear at the door, shedding his kingly demeanor like a heavy cloak. Sometimes he would merely sit in the armchair by her window, sharing the silence, the bond between them thickening with unspoken understanding. Other times, he would speak quietly of his day, a border dispute mediated, a new trade route approved, the progress of the Greyfrost children, his voice a low rumble that soothed her frayed nerves in a way nothing else could. He was teaching her, without ever saying it, how to exist with him, how to be near his immense power without being consumed by it. One such evening, as the twin moons began their ascent, he did not sit. He stood before her, his expression unreadable. "It is time," he said simply. "You cannot rule a kingdom from a single room." A cold dread, familiar as an old friend, tightened in Talia's stomach. The court. A small gathering, in the amber drawing room, only a dozen of the highest nobles. He saw the fear flash in her silver eyes and took a step closer, his scent wrapped around her, a forest anchor in a rising tide of panic. "They have demanded to assess their future Luna. I have allowed it, but you will not be alone. I will be at your side, and Kyle and Ilara will be present. They will see I'm just me," she whispered, her hands twisting in the fabric of her robe. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "Good, just you saved a king, just you endured the unendurable, just you is the other half of my soul. Let them see that. Their approval is not required, Talia, only their acknowledgement." He had brought her a dress. It was not the stiff, bejeweled gown she had feared. It was a gown of deep twilight blue, the color of the sky just before true dark, simple in cut but made of a fluid silk that moved like water. It had long sleeves and a high neckline, discreetly covering the remnants of her scars. It was elegant, regal even, but it did not scream. It whispered, just like her. Ilara helped her dress and arranged her hair, leaving it down in a simple cascade, a subtle defiance of the intricate styles worn by court ladies. When Talia finally looked in the full-length mirror, she didn't see a Luna. She saw a sharper, paler version of herself, dressed in a beautiful costume. But her eyes held a new glint, a reflection of the bonfire burning within. Luke offered his arm at the door to their chambers, not his hand, but his bent elbow, a gesture of partnership, of escort. She placed her fingers lightly on his forearm, feeling the rock-solid muscle beneath the fine fabric of his tunic. The bond surged, warm and steadying. "Remember," he murmured as they walked through the torchlit corridors, guards bowing deeply as they passed. "You are not walking into a battle, you are walking into a territory, and you are its queen, and Omega's strength is in sensing the currents. Feel the room, listen to what is not being said." The doors to the amber drawing room swung open. The room was intimate compared to the great halls, paneled in warm golden wood, firelight dancing on gilded frames, and there they were. A dozen pairs of eyes, all alpha-bright and razor-sharp, turned as one. The air, thick with the clashing sense of ambition, perfume, and old blood, hit Talia like a wall. She felt it all instantly, the sharp curiosity, the simmering resentment, the blatant hostility from a few, and a faint, thin thread of cautious hope from one or two. At the center stood the figures from the council, Lord Boren, his face a mask of grudging deference, and Lord Kieran, whose handsome features were arranged in a smile that didn't reach his calculating eyes. Beside them stood their wives and daughters, alphas and strong beaters, all dressed in silks that rustled like snakes, their gazes cataloguing every stitch of Talia's simple gown. Luke led her to the center of the room, his aura expanding just enough to create a sphere of quiet around them. "My lords, ladies, may I present Talia, my fated mate, and your future Luna." A stiff, synchronized bow and curtsy followed. The silence was palpable, waiting for her to break it. An older alpha female, Lady Selene of the Snowfang pack, stepped forward first. Her scent was of frost and sharp metal. "My lady," she said, her tone dripping with faux sweetness, "we are agog with curiosity. Your upbringing is so unique. Tell us. What pursuits prepared you for a life at court? Embroidery, music, the management of a large household?" The unspoken words hung in the air, things a proper alpha female would know. Talia felt the pressure, the expectation to stumble. She felt Luke's arm tense beneath her hand, a warning growl building in his chest. She gave the slightest press of her fingers, a silent plea to let her try. She lifted her eyes to meet Lady Selene's. She didn't smile. An Omega's smile in this context would be seen as submission. "My pursuits, my lady," Talia said, her voice clear and soft, yet carrying in the hushed room, were survival, healing, and learning to discern true intent from false kindness in an environment where a mistake meant pain. "I can stitch a wound as well as I can stitch linen. I know the songs that soothe a fevered brow, and I have managed a household of 50 terrified children on a bowl of gruel a day, ensuring the strongest did not steal from the weakest." She let her Omega senses open fully, feeling the woman's shock, the slight flicker of unease. "I find these skills translate." A beat of stunned silence. Lord Boren cleared his throat. "A practical, if grim, education, but the Luna's role is one of symbolic strength, of inspiration. The people must look to her and see power." Luke opened his mouth to interject, but Talia spoke first, turning her moon-silver gaze on the old lord. She remembered Ilara's words, "They cannot fight a goddess's decree." "What is power, Lord Boren?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Is it the strength to break or the strength to mend?" The people of Greyfrost looked at Warden Sealers and saw the first kind. It inspired fear. When they looked to their rulers, should they not hope to see the second? She paused, feeling the shift in the emotional current of the room. Confusion, interest. "I do not have the power to command armies, but I have the power to see when one of your pack is suffering in silence. I have the power to hear the truth in a false oath. And I have the power," she said, finally glancing up at Luke, the bond glowing visibly in her eyes for a moment, "to steady the strongest heart in the kingdom when the weight of rule becomes too heavy. Is that not a power worth having beside a king?" The room was utterly silent. Lady Selene had paled, Lord Kieran's fixed smile had tightened, but a younger lord at the back gave a slow, thoughtful nod. It was Lord Kieran who moved next, approaching with a predator's grace. He stopped too close, invading the space Luke's aura had carved. He reached out as if to take her hand. "A poetic defense, my lady, truly, but a kingdom is not poetry. It is blood and territory. Can you truly understand the demands placed on an alpha, the primal forces we contend with daily?" His gaze was intentionally intense, a lesser alpha trying to assert a cheap dominance to make her flinch. Before Talia could react, two things happened simultaneously. Luke's low growl finally broke free, a sound of such terrifying promise that the flames in the hearth shuddered. But more potent was Talia's own response. She did not step back, she did not lower her eyes. As Kieran's invasive, arrogant scent pushed against her, her Omega nature reacted not with flight, but with a profound, instinctive rejection. It wasn't an alpha command. It was the opposite, a wave of pure, calming authority that stemmed from the very core of her bonded status. It was the moon's gentle light, refusing the glare of a cheap torch. She didn't command him to kneel, she simply made his attempted dominance feel childish, insignificant. Kieran's confidence faltered. His extended hand dropped awkwardly. He took an involuntary half-step back, a flicker of confusion and something like shame in his eyes. He had tried to test the king's pet, and had instead run into the unshakable wall of the king's mate. "I may not understand every alpha demand, Lord Kieran," Talia said, her voice now holding a chill that mirrored Luke's. "But I understand respect, and I suggest you relearn its meaning before our next conversation." The line had been drawn, the challenge had been met, and quietly, definitively, turned aside. The rest of the evening passed in a strained but respectful manner. Conversations were polite, questions less barbed. When Luke finally signaled the end, the bows they received were deeper, the eyes more wary. Back in the sanctuary of their chambers, the door closed against the world. Talia's composure crumbled. She trembled, the adrenaline draining away to leave her exhausted. "You were," Luke said, turning her to face him, his hands firm on her shoulders, "magnificent." The pride in his voice was a tangible thing. "I was terrified," she breathed, a shaky laugh escaping her. "He was so close, I just wanted him to go away." "And you made him feel it, without a snarl or a threat. You wielded your nature as a weapon, one they have no defense against." His thumb stroked her cheek. "You saw the currents, little Omega, and you navigated them perfectly." He pulled her into his arms then, not in passion, but in solid, unwavering shelter. Her forehead rested against his chest, his heartbeat a steady drum in her ear. The bond hummed with a satisfaction so deep it was like purring. "They will not accept me," she mumbled into his tunic. "They do not have to, they only have to obey." He rested his chin on top of her head. "But tonight, you planted a doubt in them, a doubt that perhaps an Omega's heart is not a weakness, but a new kind of strength. That is how we change a world, not with one battle, but with 100 small ripples." That night, for the first time, she did not dream of whips or dark cellars. She dreamed of standing beside the white marble throne, not as an ornament, but as a pillar, and Luke's hand was in hers. The next morning, a small, exquisitely crafted box was delivered to her chambers. Inside, on a bed of black velvet, lay a pendant. It was a single, teardrop-shaped moonstone, held in delicate claws of silver. It was simple, luminous, and powerful. The note with it, in Luke's bold script, read, "For the one who already holds my heart. Wear this as a reminder that you also hold a piece of the moon's authority." As Ilara fastened the clasp around her neck, the cool stone resting just above the neckline of her dress, Talia looked in the mirror again. She still saw herself, but the reflection was changing. The fear was receding, replaced by a dawning sense of a different, terrifying, and exhilarating truth. The Omega was not just in the court. The Omega was learning to rule it. In the days that followed, the ripples spread. Lord Kieran was conspicuously absent from court, called to attend his borderlands. Lady Seline's frosty demeanor thawed a fraction into something more cautiously neutral. The story of the Omega who had calmly put an upstart alpha lord in his place without raising her voice began to circulate, morphing from a scandal into a legend in the making. Luke began including her in smaller matters of state, reviewing petitions from common pack members, discussing the allocation of healing herbs after a blight in the Southern Territories. Her insights, born of a life at the very bottom, were often startlingly effective. She pointed out where a proposed tax would disproportionately hurt Omegas who traded in handmade goods. She sensed the falseness in a pack ambassador's flattery, leading Luke to uncover a minor plot of embezzlement. She was learning the maps and histories of the kingdom, often studying late by the fire while Luke worked at his desk. The silence between them was no longer just peaceful, it was collaborative, charged with a shared purpose. One afternoon, Kyle sought her out privately in the solar, a sunlit room filled with books. "My Lady Luna," he began, his usual formality touched with a new warmth. "A situation, one of the children from Greyfrost, a young beta boy named Finn, he's not adjusting, he's defiant, fights constantly, rejects care. The caretakers are at their wits' end. They're talking about sending him to a military outpost to toughen him up." Kyle looked uncomfortable. It's a common solution for difficult males. Talia set down her book, the moonstone pendant warm against her skin. "Take me to him." The children's quarters in the keep were bright and airy, a world away from Greyfrost. But in a corner, curled on a window seat, was a boy of about 10, a storm cloud of anger and hurt. The other children gave him a wide berth. Talia dismissed the caretaker and sat on the edge of the window seat, not too close. She didn't speak. She just opened her Omega senses, letting the boy's emotional turmoil wash over her. It wasn't just anger. It was a bottomless well of betrayal, loss, and a terrifying fear of this new, soft place that felt like a trick. After a long while, she spoke softly, not looking at him. "The food here is too rich. It makes your stomach hurt, doesn't it? And the bed is too quiet." The silence at Greyfrost was different. It was full of breathing, of fear. This silence is empty. The boy, Finn, stiffened. He didn't deny it. "They took my sister," he spat finally, his voice thick with unshed tears. "When the king's men came, they said she was going to a different family. I couldn't stop them, I'm weak." Talia's heart clenched. "No," she said, her voice firm, "you are a survivor, and you love your sister. That is not weakness, that is the strongest thing in the world." She turned to look at him. "The warden's greatest lie was that caring makes you weak. It is what makes you unbreakable." She spent the next hour just sitting with him, not forcing conversation. She told him a little of her own story, of the lullaby she would sing. Slowly, the storm around him began to calm. By the time she left, he had accepted a piece of bread from her hand. She found Luke with his generals. Without apology, she interrupted. "The boy Finn, his sister was separated from him during the relocation. She must be found and brought here, immediately, and he is not to be sent away. He needs purpose, not punishment. Perhaps he can assist the royal falconer. He needs to care for something." The generals looked stunned at the interruption. Luke merely looked at her, at the quiet fire in her eyes, and nodded. "See to it," he commanded one of his men, his gaze never leaving Talia's. "The Luna's word is my own." As she left, she heard one general mutter to another, an Omega's sentiment. Luke's response was icy and immediate. "That sentiment just prevented us from creating another bitter, angry soul who might one day seek vengeance against the crown. It is not sentiment, it is strategy, a wiser strategy than any you have proposed this week. Learn the difference." The lesson was not lost on anyone. That night, as they stood together on their balcony under the twin moons, Luke's arm around her waist, he spoke into her hair. "You are remaking me too, you know. They think I am changing for you, but you are not softening me, Talia. You are sharpening my vision. You are helping me see the cracks in the foundation I built." She leaned back into his solid strength, the moonstone pendant glowing softly between them. "And you are helping me build a foundation of my own," she whispered. He turned her in his arms, his expression solemn in the moonlight. The space between them crackled with the ever-growing bond, a magnetic pull that grew stronger every day. His gaze dropped to her lips, and for a breathless moment, the world narrowed to that point of anticipation. The king, the Omega, the bond, all coalescing into a single, potent need. But he did not close the distance. He was a man of infinite control, and he was teaching her that this, too, was a form of strength. The strength to wait, to let the tension build until it became an undeniable force of its own. He rested his forehead against hers instead, their breath mingling. "Soon, little Omega," he vowed, his voice a rough promise that shivered down her spine. "Very soon, the court will be the last thing on our minds." The game was set. The shadows of the court had been faced. Now, a different kind of tension was building, one that promised a convergence far more intimate and world-shaking than any political intrigue. The full moon approached, a great silver eye swelling in the night sky, and with it, the pressure in the kingdom, and within the walls of Blackstone Keep, intensified. Talia's coronation, as Luna was no longer a distant decree. It was a looming, tangible event, and every faction was maneuvering in its shadow. Talia's days took on a new, rigorous rhythm. Mornings were spent with Ilara, not just in physical healing, but in lessons. Lessons on royal lineage, on the complex tapestry of pack alliances and blood feuds that stretched back centuries, on the subtle language of court dress and ceremony. Afternoons were with Luke or his most trusted advisors, reviewing the practical matters of state. She learned of border tensions with the mountain clans to the north, of trade disputes with the coastal packs, of the delicate balance of power that kept the kingdom from tearing itself apart. She absorbed it all with an Omega's quiet focus, but her true education came from the people, not the parchments. She began to walk the lower levels of the keep, visiting the kitchens, the armory, the weavers' quarters. She listened to the cooks complain about the price of imported spices, to the young guardsmen boast nervously before their first patrol, to the elderly weavers share tales of the kingdom under Luke's father. She said little, but her presence, her attentive silence, and the faint, calming aura she projected began to have an effect. Wherever she went, tensions subtly eased, arguments cooled, anxious hearts found a momentary peace. She was becoming the pack's heartbeat, a steady, soothing rhythm beneath the king's formidable spine. But the upper echelons of the court were a different beast. The initial shock of her had worn off, replaced by a more insidious resistance. She was no longer openly mocked, but she was expertly sidelined. Invitations to private teas somehow never reached her. Conversations in council would subtly shift to complex military history or obscure points of alpha challenge law whenever she entered, topics designed to exclude her. It was a silent, polite war of attrition. Luke saw it. His fury was a cold, contained thing that made the air in a room grow thin. He could command her inclusion, but he could not command respect. That, he told her one evening, after a particularly grating council session where her suggestions on redistributing winter stores had been met with patronizing smiles and then ignored. She would have to earn in a way they understood. They speak a language of power, he said, packing before the fire in their chambers, but not the power you wield. They understand dominance, display tangible strength. I cannot change my designation, Talia replied, not with despair, but with a weary determination. She was sitting by the window, the moonstone pendant heavy in her hand. No, Luke agreed, stopping to look at her. The firelight played over the stark planes of his face. But you can speak their language in a dialect they cannot ignore. The full moon run is in 3 nights. It is a sacred tradition. The royal pack runs together, led by their Alpha and Luna. It is a show of unity, of primal strength. The court will all be there, watching from the stands. They will expect a spectacle. They will expect you to falter, to cling to my side, to prove your weakness in the most fundamental way possible. A chill that had nothing to do with the drafty stones slipped down Talia's spine. She had not shifted since her early teens, when her Omega wolf had first emerged. A small, sleek, silver-furred creature more built for speed and stealth than combat. In Grey Frost, shifts were punished as displays of unruly nature. Her wolf was a stranger to her, a scared thing caged deep within. I haven't run in years, she confessed, her voice small. Luke crossed the room in an instant, kneeling before her chair. He took her hands in his. Your wolf is not weak, Talia. She is the other half of your soul. She is the part that called to mine in the dark. She endured the whips with you. She is fierce with a quiet fire. His storm blue eyes held hers. I will be with you every step, but you must meet her, you must lead with me. The next 2 days were a private torment. Luke took her to the royal run grounds, a vast, forested enclosure behind the keep, walled off from prying eyes. The first time she tried to call her wolf, nothing happened but a surge of panic so visceral it made her sick. The memories of punishment, of silver chains suppressing the change, rose like ghosts. Luke didn't push, he simply shifted. One moment he was a man, the next, Garth stood before her. The king wolf was colossal, a masterpiece of midnight fur and coiled power, but his eyes were the same steady blue. He nudged her gently with his massive head, a low, encouraging rumble in his chest. Trust, the bond seemed to whisper. Trust yourself, trust me. On the second afternoon, frustration and fear finally boiled over. I can't, she cried out, tears of humiliation stinging her eyes. They're right, and Omega's place isn't leading the run, it's following, it's staying out of the way. Garth shifted back in a blur. Luke, naked and unconcerned with it, gripped her shoulders. Your place is where I am, he stated, his voice leaving no room for argument. And I am at the front. Forget them, forget the court. Listen to me, listen to us. He placed her hand flat over his heart where his own beat was strong and sure. She is in there, your beautiful, brave wolf. Call her, not for them, for us. He shifted again. This time, Talia closed her eyes. She blocked out the memories of pain, the mocking faces of the court. She focused on the bond. She poured into it her love for the man who knelt in the dirt for her, her determination to stand beside him, her fierce, protective love for the orphaned children now sleeping safely in the keep, her quiet pride in the cooks and weavers who had begun to smile at her. She didn't call her wolf with a command. She called her with an invitation. The pain was brief, a bright, shocking flash that was more transformation than agony. It felt less like breaking and more like unfolding. When she opened her eyes, the world was sharper, painted in shades of silver and scent. She looked down and saw paws the color of winter moonlight. She was smaller than she'd imagined, slender and built like a ghost. She took a tentative step, then another. A feeling of incredible, pent-up freedom surged through her. She was fast. She could feel it in her long limbs. Luke's wolf, Garth, approached. He towered over her, but he lowered his great head, touching his nose to hers in a wolven kiss. A wave of love, pride, and pure, unadulterated joy crashed through the bond, so potent it made her whimper softly. He turned and loped a few paces into the trees, then looked back, an invitation in his eyes. And she ran, not following, not trailing, she ran with him. Her silver form was a dart of light next his shadow. They moved through the pines, a perfectly synchronized dance of power and grace. She couldn't match his brute strength, but she could match his spirit, and she could anticipate his turns with an instinct that felt older than time. For an hour they were just wolf and wolf, mate and mate, under the dappled forest sun. It was the most liberated, the most right she had ever felt. Later, curled together in their human forms by the run ground's secluded hot spring, Luke traced the line of her shoulder. They will not know what hit them, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. The night of the full moon run was clear and cold, the moon a blazing coin in a velvet sky. The royal run grounds had been transformed. Grandstands lined the starting meadow, filled with the entire court, glittering in furs and jewels. Torches flickered, and the air buzzed with anticipation and thinly veiled schadenfreude. Talia stood beside Luke at the head of the gathered royal pack, 200 of the kingdom's strongest warriors in wolf form. She wore a simple, functional tunic and leggings, her hair tightly braided. The moonstone pendant was tucked safely away. She was not here as a jeweled consort. She was here as a wolf. She felt the stares, heard the whispered bets being placed on how quickly she would fall behind. She felt the aggressive, challenging auras of the alpha wolves around her, their energy like static before a storm. Her own heart was a frantic drum. Luke, clad in similar gear, took her hand. He didn't look at the crowd, he looked only at her. Remember the forest, he said, his voice for her alone. Remember the freedom, this is the same, just with an audience. He brought her knuckles to his lips, a shockingly tender gesture in front of the bloodthirsty crowd. Run with me, Luna. He shifted. Garth's arrival was like a thunderclap of power, silencing the stands. Every wolf in the royal pack dipped their head in submission. Talia took one last breath. She found the core of peace within her, the place where her silver wolf waited. She thought of Luke's pride, of Finn's tentative smile when she'd told him about his sister being found, of the scent of bread from the kitchens. She called her wolf, and this time it came not as an invitation, but as a partnership. The shift was smoother now, a ripple of silver light. Where Talia had stood, a sleek, luminous she-wolf now stood. She was dwarfed by Garth, dwarfed by the warriors around her. A titter ran through the stands. She looked delicate, breakable. Lord Kieran, watching from the front row with a smirk, leaned over to Lord Boren. A pretty pet. This will be pathetic. Garth lifted his massive head and unleashed a howl that vibrated in the bones of every being present. It was a call of pure, untamed alpha authority, a call to the run, to the hunt, to the moon. And then, before the royal pack could move, Talia's wolf moved. She didn't wait, she didn't look to Garth for permission. With a powerful surge of her hind legs, she shot forward, a bolt of silver streaking across the starting meadow and into the tree line. It was not the action of a follower. It was the bold, decisive dash of a leader. For a fraction of a second, the world hung in suspension. The court's smirks froze. The royal pack wolves hesitated, confused. Then with a roar of approval that was both Lupin and human, Garth surged after her, not to overtake her, but to run at her flank, a massive black shadow guarding her silver light. The royal pack exploded into motion behind them, a river of fur and muscle following the 2 points at its head. The run was a grueling circuit of 10 miles through forest, over streams, and across rocky ridges. The court watched from strategic viewing platforms. They expected to see the Omega tiring, falling back, needing protection. They saw something else entirely. Talia's wolf did not have enduring brute force, but she had something else, inexhaustible grace, an uncanny ability to pick the most fluid path, and a speed that was breathtaking. She flowed over obstacles where others clambered. She became a ghost in the trees, always just ahead, her silver coat flashing in the moonlight like a beacon. And Garth ran not in front, but beside and just behind her. He matched her pace, his immense power a steady, supportive presence. They were not Alpha and Omega, they were partners. When the path forked, she would take one glance, and he would follow her choice without hesitation, the pack flowing behind them. When a rocky scramble challenged her, he was there, a solid presence to leap from. Halfway through, a young, overly ambitious alpha from the pack tried to push ahead, to challenge her implicit lead. He surged up beside her, his shoulder aiming to bump hers off the narrow trail. Talia didn't snarl, she didn't fight for space, she simply flowed. She adjusted her gait with effortless precision, letting him rush past onto a looser section of trail where he stumbled, losing ground. It was a quiet, elegant dismissal that spoke of supreme confidence. Garth, right behind her, pinned the chastened wolf with a single, glowing glance that promised retribution if he tried again. As they burst from the final tree line back into the torchlit meadow, the crowd was on its feet, not in mockery, but in stunned, deafening silence. Talia and Garth crossed the finish line together, her silver form a hair's breadth ahead. She skidded to a stop, sides heaving, tongue lolling, but her head was high, her moon-silver eyes blazing. Garth halted beside her, lifted his muzzle, and let out a triumphant, earth-shaking howl that was echoed by every wolf in the royal pack, a sound of absolute acceptance and loyalty. The message was unmistakable. The pack had chosen, they had followed her. As they shifted back, servants rushing forward with robes, the silence in the stands broke into a tumult, not of protest, but of awed, chaotic chatter. Lord Borin was staring, his mouth slightly agape. Lady Selene's frosty expression had melted into one of grudging, stunned respect. Lord Kieran's face was a pale mask of defeated fury. Luke, shrugging into his robe, pulled Talia into the circle of his arm, not caring who saw. Her body trembled with exertion, but her spirit soared. "Look at them," he murmured into her hair, his voice thick with triumph and something deeper. "They came to see an Omega fail. They saw a Luna born." He turned her to face the stands, his arm a band of steel around her waist. He didn't shout. He simply raised his chin, the Alpha King in his full, acknowledged glory, with his queen at his side. The crowd's chatter died. One by one, starting with the military alphas in the royal pack who had just run with her, they went to their knees. Then the generals. Then the lords and ladies in the stands. It was not the bowed knee of enforced obedience Luke could command. It was the bowed head of respect, earned under the witness of the full moon. Back in their chambers later, the adulation still ringing in her ears, the reality crashed over Talia. She sank onto a bench by the fire, trembling anew. Luke knelt before her, chafing her cold hands. "What is it?" "I led them," she whispered, awed and terrified. "They followed me." "Yes," he said simply, "because you did not try to lead them like an alpha. You led them like yourself. You showed them the strength of an Omega, resilience, grace, intuition, a strength they have been taught to despise, but cannot deny when they see it in action." He kissed her knuckles, his eyes darkening. "You have won the pack, my love. The court will take longer, but tonight you secured the only thing that truly matters, the heart of the kingdom." He stood pulling her up with him. The bond between them was a live wire, humming with the night's adrenaline, with pride, with a possessive joy so fierce it stole her breath. The space between them crackled, the memory of their run together, the synchronization, the trust, the wild freedom, translating into a new, more intimate tension. He cradled her face, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. The look in his eyes was no longer that of a king assessing his queen or a teacher guiding a student. It was a man gazing at the woman who had just shattered every expectation and completed his world in ways he'd never dreamed. "The coronation is in 5 days," he said, his voice a low, rough caress. "After that, the world and its politics can wait. There is a different pact to seal, a different bond to celebrate." He didn't kiss her. The promise was enough, a vow that hung in the air between them, sweeter and more terrifying than any challenge from the court. The run had proven her strength to the world. Soon, in the most private of ways, he would worship it. The 5 days following the run were a whirlwind, a world of silk, silver, and sacred obligation that swept Talia up in a current far more powerful than any she had faced in the forest. The stunned respect she had earned under the full moon now translated into a frantic, almost feverish activity as the entire kingdom prepared for its first lunar coronation in 3 centuries. No longer was she subtly sidelined. Now she was the relentless center of everything. Seamstresses descended upon her chambers at dawn, their arms laden with bolts of fabric that shimmered like captured starlight or flowed like liquid shadow. They measured, pinned, and draped, crafting the ceremonial gown under the watchful eyes of Ilara and a newly appointed mistress of robes, a severe but brilliant beater from a long line of royal tailors. "The traditional Luna's gown is white, my lady," the mistress explained, holding up a sketch, "to symbolize purity and a direct link to the moon goddess, but His Majesty has insisted on a modification." The sketch showed a gown of breathtaking elegance, with a high, structured neckline and long, fitted sleeves that would gracefully cover the faint remnants of her scars. It was classically regal, but the artist had rendered it not in pure white, but in a shade of moonlight silver. And woven into the intricate embroidery at the hem and cuffs were not just pearls, but tiny, polished moonstones that mirrored her pendant. "He said," Ilara murmured with a knowing smile as Talia traced the drawing with a reverent finger, "that his Luna should not wear the absence of color, but the color of her own strength." Talia's heart clenched. Every day, in 1,000 small ways, Luke was rewriting tradition around her. Her lessons intensified, but their nature changed. She was no longer learning mere history, she was learning liturgy. An ancient, wizened she-wolf named Mother Anya, the keeper of the Moon Temple, arrived. Her eyes were milky with age, but saw with unnerving clarity. "The coronation is not a political event, child," Mother Anya rasped, her gnarled hands guiding Talia through the precise, slow steps of the ritual before the altar in the keep's private chapel. "It is a covenant. You stand before the goddess, before the assembled spirits of past lunas, and before the living heart of the pack. You accept not a crown of gold, but a burden of light. You become the vessel for their hopes, the balm for their sorrows. Your alpha is the sword and the shield. You must become the hearth and the compass. Can your omega heart bear that?" Talia, moving through the solemn steps, felt the weight of the question. It was not about strength of arm, but strength of spirit. "I can try," she answered honestly. Mother Anya's wrinkled face softened. "Good. Try is the only promise the goddess accepts. Perfection is an arrogant lie." Between fittings and lessons, Luke was a steady, grounding presence. He was inundated with his own preparations, security for the influx of foreign dignitaries, final judgments to clear the docket before the holy day, the intricate diplomacy of seating arrangements in the grand hall. Yet every evening he found her. Sometimes he would simply sit with her in silence as she practiced the ritual phrases in the old tongue. Other times, he would update her on the search for Finn's sister. Successful, the girl was now traveling to the keep, or on the latest reports from the now former Greyfrost, which was being transformed into a regional healing and learning center under Kyle's supervision, another of Talia's suggestions made real. Their bond was a constant, humming connection, a shared nervous system. She felt his pride in her, his simmering anger at the few lords who still grumbled in private, and beneath it all, a deep, thrilling undercurrent of anticipation that had nothing to do with crowns. It was a promise that began where the public ceremony ended. The night before the coronation, the sheer scale of it all finally overwhelmed her. Standing alone in the center of her dressing room, surrounded by the spectral silver form of her gown hanging in the lamplight, the sacred words fled her mind. All she could see were the thousands of eyes that would be upon her tomorrow, the generations of tradition she represented and was simultaneously breaking. The quiet, book-filled solitude of Luke's chambers felt like a dream from another life. The door opened silently. Luke entered, still dressed in the dark leathers he wore for weapon drills with his guard. He smelled of cold night air, pine, and honest sweat. He took one look at her face, pale and strained in the soft light, and crossed the room. He didn't ask what was wrong. He simply opened his arms. She walked into them, pressing her face against the solid warmth of his chest, her fingers clutching the tough leather. The panic slowly ebbed, replaced by the steady, rhythmic beat of his heart against her ear. "I can't remember the words," she confessed, her voice muffled. "You will. What if I stumble? Then I will be there to catch you, as you have caught me 100 times this week without knowing it." He rested his chin on her head. "Talia, look at me." She tilted her head back. His storm blue eyes were calm, an anchor in her personal tempest. "Tomorrow you will wear a crown," he said quietly, "but you have been my Luna since the moment you pressed a cool cloth to my forehead in that dark cave, since you faced down a room full of vipers with nothing but your truth, since you led my pack on the run not by force, but by grace. The ceremony doesn't make you a Luna, it tells the world what I already know." He brushed a stray tear from her cheek with his thumb. "You are not stepping into a role, my love. You are finally being seen for who you have always been." His words were a balm, a magic more potent than any ritual. The tight knot of anxiety in her chest loosened. In its place bloomed a quiet, solid certainty. He didn't stay long. The tradition of separation the night before the coronation was one even the Alpha King would not break. But at the door he paused. "Sleep well, my heart. Tomorrow I will meet you at the altar." Coronation day dawned clear and bright, a blessing from the goddess, the courtiers whispered. The keep thrummed with palpable energy. From her window, Talia could see the grand procession of visiting alphas and their retinues entering the great gates, their banners a riot of color against the gray stone. Her own preparation was a sacred ritual in itself. Ilara and Mother Anya bathed her in water scented with moonflowers and silverleaf, anointing her wrists and temples with sacred oil. Then came the gown. It was heavier than it looked, the silver fabric cool and whispering against her skin, the thousands of tiny moonstones catching the light with every movement like scattered stars. Her hair was braided into an intricate crown of its own, woven with fresh, fragrant white blossoms and strands of pure silver thread. The final touch was her pendant, the single moonstone resting at the hollow of her throat, a touchstone of his love. When she was finally ready and looked in the full-length mirror, the stranger from her first days was gone. The woman who looked back was regal, serene, her moon-silver eyes clear and calm. She saw not an orphan, but a nexus, not an omega, but a queen. A fanfare of crystal trumpets echoed through the stone corridors, the signal. The walk to the grand temple attached to the keep was a blur of bowed heads and awed silence. She processed through lines of the royal guard in full ceremonial armor. Past the assembled nobles in their finest furs and velvets, their scents a complex tapestry of awe, resentment, and burgeoning hope. She felt it all, but it washed over her like water over stone. Her focus was ahead, down the long, moonlight-drenched aisle of the temple. The temple was an open-air coliseum of white marble, its roof open to the sky. The noonday sun streamed down, but the focus was the great altar, carved from a single block of luminous moonstone that seemed to glow with an inner light. And standing before it, facing the assembled multitudes, was Luke. He was resplendent in the formal black and silver of the Alpha King, a cloak of obsidian fur draped from his shoulders. But his crown, a stark circlet of forged iron and sharp peaks, looked less like jewelry and more like a weapon. His face was the impassive mask of sovereignty, but his eyes found hers the moment she appeared at the temple entrance, and in them the mask vanished. There was only pride, possession, and a love so fierce it was a physical force pulling her down the aisle. She walked alone, as was tradition, but she had never felt less alone. The bond between them was a golden thread, taut and singing. With every step, the murmurs of the crowd faded. All that existed was the altar and him. She reached the dais. Mother Anya, in her ceremonial robes, stood between them. The ancient ritual began, the old tongue rolling through the sun-drenched space. Talia's voice, when she was required to speak, was clear and steady, each word rising without hesitation from the core of certainty Luke had planted in her the night before. She pledged herself to the goddess, to the pack, to the service of all wolves. Then came Luke's part. He took the iron crown from his own head. He faced the crowd, his voice booming across the temple. For 300 years, this crown has been a symbol of strength alone, of rule by power and will. He turned back to Talia, his voice softening, but carrying to every ear. But a kingdom with only a sword has no heart. A pack with only a shield has no home. He placed his iron crown on the altar. From a velvet cushion held by Mother Anya, he lifted a second crown. This one was not iron, but delicate, shimmering platinum, woven like vines and flowering branches. At its front, where the vines met, rested a central moonstone the size of a dove's egg, flanked by smaller, glittering diamonds. Today, Luke proclaimed, his gaze locked with Talia, we crown not just strength, but mercy, not just power, but compassion. We crown the heart that has already begun to heal this kingdom. He raised the crown high for all to see. Behold your Luna. He turned, and with a reverence that brought a collective gasp from the crowd, placed the platinum crown upon Talia's braided hair. It was lighter than she expected, a cool, perfect weight. The moment the metal touched her, something ignited. A surge of energy, white-hot and pure, shot from the crown through her body. It was not pain, but power, an ancient, feminine, nurturing power that had slept for centuries. The central moonstone blazed with a soft, argent light. The bond between her and Luke didn't just hum, it roared to life, a conduit flooding with this new, shared energy. She saw his eyes widen, felt his shock and awe through the connection. The goddess was not just witnessing this union, she was blessing it, activating it. In that luminous, public moment, their most private connection was sanctified. The temple erupted, not in polite applause, but in a deafening, unified howl that rose from every wolf present, king, commoner, ally, and former critic alike. It was a sound of primal acceptance, of a pack whole for the first time in living memory. The sound shook the marble pillars and soared into the open sky. The official ceremonies that followed, the feasting in the grand hall, the receiving of oaths from every major pack alpha, passed in a brilliant, exhausting dream. Talia sat on the new white marble throne beside Luke's obsidian one, the crowns upon their heads. She played her part flawlessly, her every word and gesture imbued with a new, gentle authority that seemed to emanate from the glowing stone on her brow. Lords who had sneered now bowed deeply, their eyes wide. Lady Selene, when she approached to swear her pack's fealty, did not just curtsy. She placed a fist over her heart, a warrior's gesture of deep respect, and her frosty scent had warmed with something like genuine loyalty. Luke never left her side, his presence a constant, steady support, but their communication had shifted. Now, a glance, a subtle touch of his fingers against the back of her hand on the throne's arm, was enough. The bond was a living thing between them, humming with the aftermath of the temple's magic, charged with the promise of what was to come when the public world finally released them. The moon was high when the last dignitary had been greeted, the last toast drunk. Luke stood, pulling Talia up with him. He addressed the hall, his arm around her waist. The celebrations may continue, he announced, his voice ringing with a king's finality and a man's impatience. But your Luna and I retire. There were knowing smiles, respectful bows, but no protest. They had done their duty to the kingdom. Now was the time for the duty of the bond. The walk back to their chambers was made in a silence thicker than any crowd. The guards posted along the way looked straight ahead, their awareness of the potent, almost crackling energy passing between the newly crowned sovereigns, a tangible thing in the air. He opened the door to their chambers, ushering her inside. The familiar space was lit only by the fire and the twin moons now streaming through the balcony windows. The sounds of the distant feast were muffled, a world away. The door clicked shut, and the public personas fell away. Luke turned to her. In the intimate darkness, the crown of moonlight on her hair seemed to draw all the light in the room to her. He reached up, and with infinite care, he lifted the platinum circlet from her head, setting it aside on a table with a soft clink. He did the same with his own iron crown. They were just Luke and Talia again, but they were also profoundly, irrevocably more. He didn't speak. He simply looked at her, his eyes tracing the lines of her face in the moonlight, the silver gown, the pulse beating at the base of her throat where her pendant lay. The intensity of his gaze was a physical touch. "All day," he said finally, his voice a rough scrape, "I have had to share you, with the goddess, with the priests, with every pack in the kingdom." He took a step closer. The heat from his body, the scent of him, king and mate and storm, enveloped her. "Now you are mine alone." Talia's breath hitched. The certainty that had carried her through the day transformed into a different kind of strength, a yielding, receptive power. "I have always been yours," she whispered, "since the cave." A low growl of pure possession rumbled in his chest. He closed the final distance. His hands came up to frame her face, his touch devastating in its tenderness. "My brave, beautiful Luna," he murmured, his lips a breath from hers. "My heart." And then he kissed her. It was not the gentle, exploring kiss of new lovers. It was a claiming, a consecration, a release of weeks of agonizing control and public pretense. It was the forest run and the temple's blessing made physical. It was fire and storm and an endless, deep well of longing finally given its due. Talia melted against him, her hands coming up to clutch at the hard planes of his back, her own need rising to meet his in a dizzying tide. The bond between them, already alight, erupted into a supernova of feeling. It was more than emotion, it was a fusion of senses. She felt the scrape of his stubble against her skin as her own sensation, felt the pounding of his heart echo in her chest. He poured his awe, his reverence, his desperate, all-consuming love into the kiss, and she drank it in, returning it with the trust, the devotion, the fierce, quiet passion he had awakened in her. It was a kiss that sealed covenants more binding than any spoken before an altar. It was the beginning of everything that came after the crown. The world outside their chambers ceased to exist. The distant sounds of the continuing celebration, the politics of the court, the very weight of their crowns, all dissolved into the quiet roar of the bond and the storm of their kiss. It was a claiming, but not of possession. It was a mutual surrender, a sacred acknowledgement that had been building since the moment her healing hands had touched his skin in the darkness. Luke's mouth was fierce and demanding, yet his hands that cradled her face were infinitely gentle. Talia met his intensity not with submission, but with an answering fire that had been banked her whole life. A blaze fanned by his unwavering belief in her. She tasted the wine from the feast on his lips, but beneath it was the essential flavor of him, wild pine and ancient power, and a love so vast it was terrifying. When they finally broke apart, breathless, their foreheads rested together. The bond between them was no longer a humming thread, but a living river of light and feeling, thrumming with a need that was both physical and profoundly spiritual. "Luke," she breathed, his name a prayer and an anchor. He didn't answer with words. His hands slid from her face, down the column of her neck, over the delicate silver thread embroidery at her shoulders. His touch was reverent, as if she were the most precious, fragile artifact, yet his eyes burned with a heat that promised she was anything but fragile. He was the Alpha King, a being of legendary control, and she could feel that control stretched to its absolute limit, a wire about to snap. With a soft, tearing sound, his fingers found the first of the hidden clasps at the side of her magnificent gown. He didn't fumble. His movements were deliberate, precise. Each clasp released was a sentence spoken in a secret language. "You are mine, I have waited. You are worth every second of the wait." The heavy, moonstone-studded silk whispered as it loosened. Talia stood still, her heart hammering against her ribs, not with fear, but with an anticipation so acute it was a kind of pain. This was the final barrier, the last veil between the queen the world saw and the woman she was for him alone. She watched his face as he worked, saw the awe in his stormy eyes, the slight tremble in his normally steady fingers as they brushed against the simple linen of her shift beneath. The gown pooled at her feet like a fallen cloud, leaving her standing in the soft undergarments, the firelight and moonlight painting her skin in gold and silver. The scars on her back were faint silver lines in the dim light, a map of her past. He did not ignore them. He turned her slowly, his breath catching as he saw them fully in the intimate glow. His touch, when it came, was not one of pity, but of worship. He traced the longest line, from shoulder to the base of her spine, with a single, feather-light fingertip. "My brave, beautiful mate," he murmured, his voice thick with an emotion that was part rage at her past and part soul-deep reverence. "Every mark, every moment of pain, it led you to me. I would spend 1,000 years erasing them if I could, but they are part of you, and I cherish every part." His words unlocked something deep within her, a final, hidden chamber of shame and fear that dissolved into nothingness. She was laid bare before him in every sense, and she was not found wanting. He turned her back to face him, and then his own clothes followed a simpler, quicker path. Buckles gave way, leather and linen were shed, until he stood before her as nature and the goddess had made him powerful, magnificent, and utterly hers. There was no awkwardness, only a breathtaking rightness. The mating bond pulsed between their bare skin, a tangible pull, drawing them together like opposite poles of a magnet. He didn't rush. He gathered her into his arms again, skin to skin, and the contact was an electric shock of pure sensation. The hard planes of his body against her softer curves, the heat of him, the feel of his powerful heart thundering against her own, it was overwhelming and perfect. He kissed her again, deeper, slower, his hands mapping the landscape of her back, her waist, the gentle flare of her hips, as if committing her to memory. Then he lifted her. She was weightless in his arms. He carried her not to the grand, canopied bed that had been meant for a royal couple, but to the large, soft fur rug before the roaring fireplace. Here the light danced over them, intimate and primal. Here they were not a king and queen, but Luke and Talia, wolf and mate, at the most ancient of altars. He laid her down amidst the furs, following her down, bracing himself above her. His eyes held hers, a universe of promise and question in their blue depths. The final, silent ask for consent. Talia reached up, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw, the curve of his lower lip. She saw not just the alpha, but the man who had knelt in the forest to help her find her wolf, who had defended her with words and wrath, who had placed a crown of moonlight on her head. She poured all her trust, all her love, all her fierce, hard-won courage into her gaze and gave him a slow, sure nod. Yes, she whispered, the word a vow. A shudder ran through him, the last vestige of his legendary control shattered. What followed was not a gentle claiming, but a conflagration. It was the culmination of every charged glance, every brief touch, every moment of shared understanding and suppressed desire. He kissed her with a hunger that bordered on desperation, his hands and mouth learning her, worshipping her, stoking a fire within her she never knew she possessed. Talia, the quiet Omega, met his passion with a wildness of her own, her hands exploring the corded muscle of his shoulders and back, her mouth leaving its own claiming marks on the skin of his neck and chest. The bond didn't just hum, it sang, it screamed, it fused. Sensation wasn't just doubled, it was multiplied, shared, reflected back and forth in an endless amplifying loop. She felt his pleasure as her own, the dizzying spike of ecstasy when her nails scored his back, the deep, groaning satisfaction as she arched against him. And he felt hers, the building, coiling tension, the shock of each new caress, the overwhelming rightness of his weight anchoring her to the earth. When he finally, slowly, joined his body to hers, it was not an invasion, but a homecoming. A perfect, shocking completion that made them both cry out, a single sound from two throats. The world narrowed to the point where they were connected, to the storm in his eyes, to the feel of his breath mingling with hers. He began to move, and it was a dance more profound than any they had run in the forest. It was a rhythm as old as the moon above them, a push and pull that was both giving and taking, leading and following. Talia was lost in the sensation, in the emotional torrent flowing through the bond, his awe, his possessiveness, his staggering, boundless love. She gave herself over to it, meeting him thrust for thrust, her own feelings of safety, devotion, and a soul-deep, rising ecstasy pouring back into him. There were no more words. They were unnecessary. The bond was their language, their bodies the prayer. The firelight danced over their entwined forms, casting shifting shadows on the stone walls as the pace built from a slow, worshipful rhythm to something more urgent, more primal. The coil within Talia tightened unbearably, a star on the verge of supernova. Through the bond, she felt the same tension coiling in him, a mirror of her own impending climax. He buried his face in the curve of her neck, his breath hot against her skin. "Look at me," he growled, the command laced with unbearable tenderness. Her moon-silver eyes, hazy with pleasure, found his storm-blue ones. In that moment, as they hovered on the precipice, the bond did not just connect them, it merged them. She saw not just his face, but flashes of his soul. His centuries of loneliness, the weight of the crown, the moment he awoke in the cave and saw her, the fierce, protective joy of watching her lead the run. And she knew he saw hers. The cold of the orphanage cellar, the warmth of her compassion, the fear and the courage, the absolute trust she placed in him. With a cry that was both a sob and a song, Talia shattered. Her climax ripped through her, a wave of pure, white-hot pleasure so intense it stole her vision, her breath, her very sense of self. And through the bond, she felt his own release a heartbeat later, a roaring, ground-shaking culmination that triggered her own anew, an endless echo of ecstasy between them. He collapsed upon her, his great weight a welcome anchor, his body trembling with the same aftershocks that quaked through her own. For long minutes, there was only the sound of their ragged breathing and the crackle of the fire. The bond, which had been a roaring inferno, settled into a deep, golden hum of profound satisfaction and unimaginable peace. Slowly he rolled, taking her with him, cradling her against his chest so she lay atop him, her head over his heart. His hands stroked her back, her hair, in long, soothing passes. The silence was deeper than any they had ever shared. It was the silence of a soul finally finding its harbor. After a small eternity, Talia stirred. She lifted her head to look at him. His eyes were closed, his face relaxed in a way she had never seen it, the harsh lines softened into an expression of absolute contentment. She brushed a damp lock of hair from his forehead. His eyes opened. The blue was no longer a storm, but a deep, calm sea. He looked at her as if she had hung the very moon they had sworn their vows under. "My Luna," he whispered, the title now imbued with a meaning that belonged only to them. "My king," she whispered back, her lips curving in a soft, sated smile. He shifted, sitting up and bringing her with him, wrapping a fur around her shoulders before pulling her back against his chest. They sat together before the fire, watching the flames dance, their bodies and souls seamlessly intertwined. "It's different now," she said quietly, not needing to elaborate. The bond felt settled, permanent, like a foundation of bedrock had been laid beneath the glorious palace of their connection. "It's complete," he corrected softly, his lips against her temple. "The promise made in the temple is sealed here. We are one, in the eyes of the goddess, the pack, and each other." He paused, his arms tightening around her. "There is a final step, the mating mark. It is permanent. It will tie our life forces, our very souls, for as long as we both live. There is no going back." Talia didn't hesitate. She turned in his arms, cupping his face. "There was never any going back from the moment I found you," she said, her voice steady with certainty. "From the moment the bond snapped into place in that courtyard, my soul has been yours since before I knew it. Mark it, claim it, make it a truth the whole world can see." A fierce, joyous light blazed in his eyes. He bowed his head, his lips brushing the spot where her neck met her shoulder, the sacred, traditional place for a mating mark. His canines, which had elongated slightly with his passion, pressed against her skin, not breaking it yet. "It may hurt," he warned, his voice a guttural mix of wolf and man. "I know pain," she answered, tilting her head to give him better access, her trust absolute. "And I know this pain will be a beginning, not an end." With a low, loving growl that vibrated through her very bones, he bit down. The pain was sharp, bright, and over in an instant. It was immediately washed away by a tidal wave of something else, a final, locking click in the very center of her being. The bond, already deep, now felt infinite, eternal. She felt a surge of his life force, vibrant and powerful, flow into her, and a corresponding pulse of her own gentle, resilient strength flow into him. It was the last piece of the puzzle slotting into place. When he pulled back, laving the small twin wounds with his tongue to begin the supernatural healing, she saw his own neck just above the collarbone. Two matching marks, glowing with a faint silver light, had appeared on his skin. She had marked him as surely as he had marked her. The bond was not a one-way claim, but a mutual, indelible brand. Exhaustion, deep and sweet, finally began to pull at her. Luke lifted her once more and carried her to the great bed. He pulled back the covers and laid her down, climbing in beside her and pulling her into the shelter of his body, her back to his chest, his arms wrapped around her, his face buried in her hair. As she drifted on the edge of sleep, safe, loved, and irrevocably bound, his final words were a warm breath against her ear. "Sleep, my heart, my mate, my everything. The world awaits its king and queen tomorrow, but tonight we are just us." And for the first time in both their long and lonely lives, just us was more than enough. It was everything. Dawn broke over Blackstone Keep not with a fanfare, but with a profound, resonating quiet. The reverie of the coronation feast had long since burned down to embers, and in the royal chambers, a new kind of peace held sway, the deep, sated silence of a bond fully claimed, a puzzle perfectly completed. Talia awoke not to the chill of a dungeon or the anxiety of a strange room, but to a wall of warmth and the steady, solid rhythm of a heartbeat against her back. Luke's arm was a heavy, possessive band around her waist, his body curled protectively around hers even in sleep. The faint, pleasant ache in her muscles and the tiny, tingling pulse at the mark on her neck were sweet reminders of the night's sacred violence, of the love that had been both a tempest and a sanctuary. She didn't move, she simply lay there, savoring the feeling. The bond between them was no longer a thrilling, unpredictable current. It was a deep, still lake of perfect understanding. She could feel the contours of his dreams, vague impressions of running through sun-dappled forests, of a silver light beside him. She could sense the utter, bone-deep contentment in his sleeping soul, a feeling so foreign to the burdened king he had been that it brought tears to her eyes. As if sensing her wakefulness, his arm tightened infinitesimally. A low, sleepy rumble vibrated against her spine. "You're thinking too loudly, little wolf," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep and a new, devastating intimacy. A soft laugh escaped her. "I'm thinking this is the first morning I haven't been afraid of what the day would bring." He shifted, rolling her gently onto her back so he could look down at her. The morning light, pale and kind, streamed through the balcony windows, gilding his hair and softening the hard lines of his face. His storm blue eyes were clear, holding none of the king's calculation, only the man's naked love and a simmering, satisfied heat as his gaze traced the line of her shoulder to the mark he'd placed there. He leaned down and pressed his lips to it, a touch so tender it made her breath catch. "You will never have cause for that fear again," he vowed against her skin, his words a solemn promise. "Not while I draw breath." His gaze lifted, meeting hers, and a mischievous glint entered his eyes, so unlike his usual solemnity it was startling. "Though the day may bring its own challenges, starting with Elara and a battalion of servants undoubtedly waiting outside that door." The reality of their new, very public life intruded, but even that couldn't dampen the glow within her. They were not just Luke and Talia anymore. They were the Alpha King and his officially crowned, fully mated Luna. The world awaited. The predicted battalion arrived not long after, led by a beaming Elara whose wise eyes missed nothing, from the rumpled furs by the fireplace to the new, matching marks on their necks. Her smile was one of deep maternal satisfaction. The servants moved with hushed reverence, drawing baths scented with calming herbs, laying out clothes, not the overwhelming finery of the coronation, but elegant, powerful daywear. For Luke, a tunic of charcoal grey with silver fastenings. For Talia, a gown of deep, forest green velvet, cut for movement and authority, the high neckline subtly showcasing her mating mark. As they dressed, the dynamic between them had shifted into something effortless, a silent conversation of touches and glances. He fastened a stubborn clasp at the back of her gown. She smoothed the collar of his tunic, her fingers lingering on the mark on his skin. Each touch was a reinforcement of the new, unbreakable truth of them. The first true test came at the morning council. As they entered the war room together, the assembled advisors, generals, ministers, and the few high lords permitted rose. The air was different. Before, Talia's presence had been a point of tension, a silent challenge in the room. Now, as her scent, subtly intertwined with Luke's powerful alpha signature, washed over them, and as the visible marks on their necks announced the completed bond, the resistance seemed to physically deflate. Lord Borin, his earlier hostility replaced by a weary acceptance, was the first to bow, not just to Luke, but dipping his head respectfully to Talia. "My king, my Luna." Council's agenda was weighty. Final reports on the Greyfrost transition, intelligence on the Restless Mountain clans, the logistics of implementing Talia's proposed common pack healing outposts. Talia took her seat beside Luke, not as an observer but as a participant. When the discussion on the mountain clans grew heated, focusing on military posturing and punitive tariffs, she listened quietly, her omega senses parsing the underlying emotions in the room: frustration, fear, a stubborn pride. "May I speak?" Her voice was quiet but cut through the debate. All eyes turned to her. Luke gave a slight, encouraging nod. "The reports say the mountain clans are stealing our winter livestock," she began, but the deeper report from our border sentinels, the one buried on page 3, notes their own herds were decimated by the red-tinged plague last season. They are not acting from malice, but from desperation. A starving wolf is a dangerous wolf. Sending more soldiers will only make them more desperate, more dangerous. She leaned forward, her green sleeves brushing the polished table. What if our first shipment to the border this winter included not just soldiers, but a percentage of our surplus grain and a team of our healers who have developed a treatment for the red tinge? We would be addressing the cause, not the symptom. We would be showing strength through security, not just through threat. A general, a grizzled old warrior named Torvin, scoffed, and appeared weak, begging them to stop stealing with gifts. Luke's voice was calm but held a finality that silenced the room. There is weakness, General, and there is wisdom. One depletes our resources in an endless cycle of retaliation. The other secures a border and potentially gains an ally. The Luna's strategy is not the strategy of the battlefield, but of the long campaign, of building a kingdom that does not constantly bleed itself from 100 small cuts. He looked at Talia, pride blazing in his eyes. We will combine the approaches. Increase border patrols and send the aid convoy. Let them see our fist is strong, but our hand can be open. Draft the orders. It was a revolution, delivered not with a shout, but with a quiet suggestion and a king's unwavering support. The old ways were not being demolished overnight, but they were being gently, irrevocably rerouted around the steady, compassionate heart now beating beside the throne. Days that followed fell into a new pattern, the foundation of their reign. Mornings were for statecraft, where Talia's unique perspective became an indispensable counterpoint to Luke's formidable will. Afternoons were often hers alone, spent in the parts of the keep that had become her domain, the healing wards where she assisted and learned from Ilara, the bustling kitchens where she helped devise more efficient and nutritious menus for the guards and staff, the new schoolroom for the Greyfrost children. She visited Finn and his reunited sister, Liana, often. The boy's defiant anger had softened into a fierce, protective loyalty directed at her. He was thriving under the Falconer's tutelage, his sharp eyes and steady hands a natural fit. Seeing the once terrified children laugh and learn in the sunlit courtyard was a balm to her own soul, a living testament to the change their union had wrought. But the true magic happened in the spaces between, in their private world. Evenings were theirs. Sometimes they spent them in the royal library, reading in comfortable silence or debating histories. Other times, Luke would teach her the basics of swordplay in a private courtyard, not to make her a warrior, but to help her understand the language of power and defense, her slender form moving with growing confidence under his guiding hands. And always, there were the nights. The passion of their mating night had banked into a constant, smoldering fire that needed only a glance to flame. Their intimacy was a continuing exploration, a joyful discovery of each other's bodies and souls through the lens of their unbreakable bond. It was playful one night, fiercely passionate the next, and deeply tender always. The connection they shared transcended the physical. It was a merging of spirits, a silent conversation where love was spoken in touch, in breath, in the shared stillness that followed. It was safe, it was consuming, and it was the anchor that made the storms of the day not just bearable, but meaningful. Several weeks after the coronation, a different kind of test arrived. An emissary from the most traditional and isolated of the southern packs, the Stonehowlers, demanded an audience. Their alpha, a grim old wolf named Grath, was notorious for his rigid adherence to the old ways. He arrived in the throne room with a contingent of his fiercest warriors, their scents bristling with disapproval. He bowed perfunctorily to Luke, then his flinty eyes swept over Talia, seated on her marble throne, dressed in a simple silver-grey gown, her mating mark clear. He did not acknowledge her. King Luke, Grath's voice was like grinding stones. We come on a matter of concern. The rumors that reach our mountains are unsettling, talk of an Omega on the throne, of changed laws, of resources given to rogues and weaklings. The Stonehowler pack does not recognize this new direction. We came to see if the great Alpha King has truly been weakened by his gaze flicked to Talia with disdain, by a softer touch. A dangerous stillness filled the throne room. Luke's power began to gather, a pressure building in the air. Talia felt his anger, a righteous inferno through the bond, but she also felt the strategic part of his mind working. Grath was provoking a direct, physical challenge, a language Luke could win, but which would only deepen the divide, potentially causing a civil war. Before Luke could speak, Talia rose from her throne. She did not step down from the dais, but she moved to stand at its edge, looking down at the grizzled Alpha. Her heart hammered, but her voice was calm, carried by a power that was not Alpha command, but the serene authority of the bond and the crown. Lord Grath, she said, and the room seemed to hold its breath. You speak of weakness. I was whipped and scarred for saving the life of the wolf who is now your king. Was that weak?" She didn't wait for an answer. "You fear a soft touch. I have felt the hard touch of cruelty. It does not build loyalty, it forges resentment. My soft touch, as you call it, has filled the empty bellies of your own pack, Northern Outpost, which your reports to the Crown last winter falsely claimed was well provisioned." Grath's eyes widened slightly. That particular deception had been a secret. "The king's strength has never been in question," Talia continued, her silver eyes holding his. "But a kingdom that rules only by the fear of that strength is a brittle one. It shatters under the first real blow. We are building something that can bend, not break, that can absorb a shock and grow stronger. You are welcome to remain in your mountains and cling to the old ways until they turn to dust in your hands." Or she said, extending a hand not in offer, but in indication, "You can help us build the new ones. Your warriors are famed for their endurance. We have need of such strength to guard the new trade routes that will bring prosperity and grain and medicine to all packs, including the Stonehowlers in a harsh winter. The choice is not between strength and weakness, Lord Grath. It is between isolation and a place in a stronger whole." She turned and calmly resumed her seat, her gaze meeting Luke. His anger had transformed into a blazing, fierce pride. He looked back at Grath. "You have heard your Luna," Luke said, his voice the final, crushing weight. "The offer is made. Return to your mountains and decide. But know this, challenge her place again, and you challenge me, and I do not issue challenges, I end them." Grath stood, a battle playing out on his weathered face. The outright rebellion he'd intended had been disarmed, turned into a political choice. He looked from Luke's unyielding visage to Talia's serene one. He had come expecting a fragile Omega to cower or a furious Alpha to fight. He had found neither. He had found a united front of a different, more formidable kind. With a grunt that was neither acceptance nor refusal, but a clear retreat from his earlier belligerence, he bowed, slightly deeper this time, to Luke, and then, after a heavy pause, gave a curt nod in Talia's direction. He and his warriors left, the tension leaking from the room. Later, on their private balcony under a sky strewn with stars, Luke pulled Talia into his arms. "You were extraordinary," he murmured into her hair. "You turned a potential war into a diplomatic negotiation with nothing but truth and steel in your voice." She leaned back against him, watching the moon. "I just said what we both knew. I just said it in a language he wasn't prepared to hear." "Our language," Luke said, turning her to face him. His eyes were soft, the heart and the howl together. He kissed her, a slow, tender seal on their victory. As the months turned, the kingdom began to truly transform. The healing outposts, dubbed Moon Havens, sprang up in remote territories, staunching small resentments before they